Okay, guys. So today's session is over complex oncology studies and designs, and leveraging custom functions will be the main topic. However, this is a laid-back Q&A session, so I hope y'all came with questions, and I know the Kevins came with answers. So, one quick tidbit before we start. In order to join the session, everybody is automatically muted as you enter our call. So to unmute yourself, you either click on this little red button or this little red button, and then it'll unmute yourself so that you can ask any questions. Separately, if you look down below on the right side, there's a questions tab where if you don't want to unmute yourself or you can't unmute yourself for some reason, we have had technical issues, you can type your question into the questions tab, and then I will either ask it aloud or we can answer it directly inside the questions tab. So without further ado, let's do a little quick intro. This final session is with our two clinical programmers. Interestingly enough, each one of them specializes in a different EDC system. I wanted that for y'all so that we can get the different takes of both EDC systems. And Kevin Mcdonald, do you want to do a quick intro first?
Sure. My name is Kevin Mcdonald. I'm one of the senior clinical programmers with SDC. I've been with SDC for 4 years. I've been in the clinical trial industry for 15 years and 30 years actually in healthcare overall, working on a variety of different things. And that's why, if you noticed, it says Jack of all trades. I've kind of touched it all. So.
And Kevin
And
George.
my name is Kevin George, another senior clinical programmer here at SDC. I've been with SDC almost 5 years now, officially. And I have experience in both MedNet and the Rave platform. I've been the primary Rave programmer with SDC for about the last 3 years. And I would say my specialty would be custom function building. I'm a big advocate for custom functions in general.
Okay, well, with that intro, why don't we dive right in? Kevin, why do you think it's so important that we have these custom functions, and where have you found it most needed?
Okay, so custom functions kind of have a bad rap amongst CROs and sponsors and even
Why?
metadata. I think there are relatively few programmers out there who have the experience with C#, which is the programming language in which they're written. And so most programmers, to be a Rave programmer, you don't necessarily need to know custom functions, although there are some areas where it's essential. But I think there's just a relative lack of knowledge to build them and build them properly. I have a pretty extensive background in C# programming before my time at SDC, so it's a platform I'm quite comfortable with. But I think there's a general fear because of the complexity and just the potential for things going on that are not easily seen. To a lot of folks, it's kind of a black box, and they want to keep things simple. But for me, custom functions are really an essential part of any Rave study, and especially one that needs to employ complex functionality. Oncology studies are a great example of where that is. There are certain functions in Rave, even something simple as assigning a subject ID or setting a subject status, that really must have a custom function in order to work. So there's a certain level of essentialness with having custom functions, but they're usually limited to very few and very straightforward, simple ones. Whereas I like to employ them pretty extensively because it just gives you a lot of power. It allows you to go into the plumbing of the system and do things that the high-level edit checks and whatever don't give you access to, but it's giving you that power, and with great power as we know, comes great responsibility, and obviously you have the power to do a lot of bad things, which is why it's really important to kind of know what you're doing.
I would agree with that actually, and to just kind of add to it a little bit is that, we live in such a point and click type of world where everything, a lot of the EDC platforms are getting very, easier to use. They're, you don't need a sophisticated programmer to accomplish, those tasks. And so that's why, as Kevin mentioned, there's that general fear out there because, people don't know and are not comfortable with it. And they're afraid of what it could do as a result of that. So.
Yeah, and I agree with Kevin that, I mean, for the most part, I think the simplistic design platform where it's point and click, drag and drop, can get you usually 80 to 90% of the way there. And for some simple studies, that's enough. But for functionality that goes beyond that, and we have some sponsors that definitely test the boundaries of what is possible, that's just not enough. So, I mean, it does require some complexity behind the scenes, and the other platform, MedNet, as well. I mean, there are ways to do some more complex things, and we are typically very good at finding ways to do things that aren't necessarily expected, but can be accomplished with some thought.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one of the things that we were actually discussing a lot yesterday in the session is this new movement for all of the EDCs to have this drag and drop interface so that a data manager without programming background can build their own database. But, one of the things that we brought up is what if you need to customize something? And so then at that point, after you've created this drag and drop database, and then you need to customize something, does that mean that you can no longer go back to the drag and drop option to make changes because you've customized something on the back end? Or is it actually the opposite? You can't use the drag and drop option plus the customization later on.
You should be able to use both. If the software is designed correctly, it should allow you to leverage both. But again, there's always going to be that unique scenario that's out there that just can't be accomplished at that moment with the EDC platform because they're a software company and they're trying to put in a lot of different functionality for the different clients. So, we're fortunate that we also use things outside of the EDC, such as SaaS. We program SaaS listings because there's things that we just can't do in the EDC, and we'll do it in that manner. And we'll create those listings for data management to, continue to perform their, daily activities. So it's tough. There isn't an EDC platform out there that does everything. And,
If they say they do,
yeah, right. They say they do, but in reality, there's a client that says, well, hey, I want to do this, or maybe something's not working correctly, and we have to do something outside of the system as a result of it too. Because they have a bug in their software. Well, when are they going to get to the bug? Is it 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years? We don't know. But we have an immediate need, so we have to solve the problem today. And that's
Right.
what we do as programmers. Our programming team is, second to none. We sit there and we'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and I'd say I think for fear of offending any EDC systems out there, I think the approach of trying to super simplify or oversimplify the design process for EDCs is a bit misguided. I think those that have a good amount of experience designing databases can say, I mean, that there is a lot of value in that experience, and the simple drag and drop can get you a very basic form with basic checks and basic functionality, but it doesn't necessarily address the needs of the study or the site. The user interface and how sites interact with the database is very important, and we need to understand that. And we've learned over time, with feedback and with experience, how that experience needs to be, and what things can we do to help simplify that experience. And oftentimes that is creating some complexity that allows for things to happen dynamically that guide the site in the right direction, that aren't just available with here are all your forms, here are all your visits, just enter stuff. And not designing it properly from the beginning creates a lot more burden on data managers later, having to clean up messes, having to query on a lot of data that doesn't belong or is put in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, I mean, I believe I'm a much bigger believer in, in investing in a proper design. You get a much better end product rather than try to save time on a quick build, because I think you're going to spend that time on the back end.
Have we done any studies that don't require custom functions?
I sure haven't. I mean, we're talking Rave. When we're, just to be clear, when we're talking custom functions, that is specifically a Rave thing. Mednet has kind of a similar thing in that you can do you can set up a basic drag and drop edit check, but then you can kind of go behind the scenes in XML and make it more complex. And it's kind of a parallel to that. Custom functions, you still need an edit check, but you're kind of going behind the scenes and saying, okay, dive in a little deeper and manipulate it a bit more. But no, I mean, like I said, there are certain functionality in every Rave study that really has to have a custom function. But they are fairly standard. Metadata would say here, this is kind of a basic one that you need to do this, like setting a subject status, for example. There's really no way around it. But most studies don't go beyond that. But I routinely write studies with 50, 60, 100 more custom functions, whereas most would not, I would say, safe to say.
Okay, so then inside IMedNet, we use separate programming that, I guess, what is the equivalence inside IMedNet?
So in IMedNet, it's still an edit check, and even a custom function has to be called from something. So it's kind of, I'm trying to think of the right word to use. There are a lot of similarities. It's whether we go into an edit check in IMedNet and say this, when this condition exists, then perform this action. That's a very simple one. But if you want it to cross forms, if you want it to look at specific visits, then you have to go in and tell it, hey, by the way, I need it to, look at this, this, and this. So I have to go and edit that manually. So in essence, I am creating something, custom in that regard. And we do that on a routinely basis too. So it's custom. It's just what is the level of customization that's being done to accomplish the task.
Okay, yeah. And do you find it easier to build databases in IMedNet or in Rave?
That would
Kind of a
be
loaded
different answers
question,
there.
I guess.
There's pluses and minuses to both. It is easier to build forms in IMedNet than in Rave, because it's a drag and drop interface. It's also one where we can place fields where we want on the form. In IMedNet versus, we can go horizontal to vertical, where in Rave it's very vertical. And, Kevin will, obviously jump in at, some point too, it is easier to design a form. The reporting is right up front in IMedNet, but so those are the pros to, IMedNet. And I'll let Kevin speak about,
Yeah.
Rave
No,
a little.
Yeah, I agree with that in terms of putting a form together and making everything on the form be in a certain position, because IMedNet utilizes HTML basically. You're effectively creating, tables of data and tables of fields, whereas in Rave it really is very linear, whether it's a log horizontally or vertically. So in actually designing a form, I would say, yeah, IMedNet is a quicker drag and drop. once you've got forms built, Rave is very powerful in allowing you to leverage that for other forms, copying and dragging to other studies, and bringing in checks associated with those fields. So that part of the design, once you've already got a library, as it were, of forms and fields and checks, it's very easy to leverage that into other studies, which we do a lot of. But yeah, certainly from that standpoint, it's easier to build. But I would say once you get into very complex, for example, oncology studies, MedNet can only go so far. It can accomplish it, but some of the things that we ultimately end up doing with Rave are not very feasible, or at least much more difficult with IMedNet. So it just depends on what's needed out of the study.
Okay.
Yep.
So I just wanted to take a quick pause here and see if anybody else had any questions before we move on. Nope. Well, one thing that I thought would be interesting is that yesterday's session, we talked about multiple amendments, multiple protocol amendments, and how that affects, your database and how that affects downstream. And we got the answer from the data management perspective, but I wanted to get, from you guys, from the clinical programming perspective, what are your biggest challenges when it comes to multiple protocol amendments? And is there an easy way around them?
The short answer is no.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Everything looks easy on the surface, and this is where Rave does actually stand out a bit more, because they can handle versioning a lot easier than IMedNet. The challenge is how do you program around it? I'll speak for IMedNet for a minute. Is that one of the challenges is that since there's not a versioning in the sense of the word, where changes made today will only affect subjects going forward, that is where we have to enhance the edit checks to say, well, look at this version, or look at that version. And then, of course, you can go a lot deeper and say, well, only these things are applicable for this, these couple versions, and then but these other versions, this is what's applicable. So the level of complexity starts getting up there. And I know when people ask those kind of questions, I sit there and I actually ask them, is this a study level amendment change? Is this a site level amendment, or a patient level? And if I actually had a video camera, their eyes would probably be all like glassed over and say, we're not sure. Or they think they know what they might want, but they really don't. So it does make it very challenging. It's not, unfortunately, a simple, straightforward of, oh yeah, let's just add this another amendment. We've actually had a study, and I can think of, where forms were only applicable at visits for certain amendments, and so we raised the level of complexity even greater. So from my perspective, it's never easy. It doesn't matter the EDC platform, but my experience is more with IMedNet, and then I know with a couple others like Open Clinica, you can do versioning, but again, it is a great challenge, and it's just not an easy thing to just say, yep, we can do that. So.
Yeah, I'll certainly echo that sentiment. And really in either system, and particularly in MedNet, yeah, the more complex you get, you do an amendment, it's really complicated, and you create all these, edit checks with if this, then that. You've got a lot of these conditions in play, and then along comes another amendment, and now there are more, and you can just see this thing, exponentially getting more complicated with all of these different avenues. And when you think about not only programming that, but testing it and trying out all of these scenarios to make sure that they work, and applying that to existing data and not having anything go wrong, it just becomes very difficult. Certainly with Rave, as Kevin mentioned, there is a versioning system, so that is much easier to kind of determine which subjects, I will say, so one of the things that Rave can do is branch. So what you can do is apply a version only to certain subjects or certain sites or whatever it may be. I don't think we've done that more than once, and I think we did that a while back and kind of decided not to do that anymore. When I'm talking about branching, I'm saying, so for site X, they're gonna go to protocol version 5 and everyone else is gonna stay on 4. So you actually have 2 versions of the database in play, one for site X and one for the rest. And these are now 2 independent versions. The problem there is every time you update or amend anything general to the study, you need to do that in both places because they are acting independently. So it's a good way to segregate really complex functionality. If the studies are very different and they branch and behave very differently, you're almost forced to do that. But in general, then it becomes a maintenance headache. And if it's a long-term study, you're looking at potentially years of duplicate updates in 2 different versions. So we try to stay away from that. But with Rave, and particularly with custom functions, it does make it much easier, both in the design of the programming and also in the actual migration of existing data, to do that very purposefully and with great, what's the word I'm looking for? Not accuracy, but basically what I typically do is, when someone has a new version of a protocol, an amendment, there's a reconsent form somewhere in there and they're saying, okay, this subject is now reconsenting to version 5. And so in many of the functions that perform a lot of the activity, it's doing a check that's saying, as of visit whatever, or as of the visit that's currently being worked on, are they on the new version or are they on the old version? And that's based on when they did the reconsent. And I can compare those dates and say, okay, they reconsented at visit 5. So now at visit 6, I know that they should be getting the new functionality, not the old functionality, but it'll still behave like it did before if they were on visit 3, if that makes sense. So that's really only accomplishable with custom functions. And in the migration process, some of these complex studies where we are adding forms and removing forms and adding fields on forms that weren't there before, but only for certain sites or only for certain versions of the protocol. All of that's done with custom functions during a migration where it's saying, okay, take all these existing subjects, add this field, put this date in for any subjects of this type that are already existing. And so there's so much more that can be done. If you tried to use just the basic migration functionality of reapplying matrices and things, it just doesn't work. So the more complicated your study gets, or if you know that your study is going to be very complicated, that amendments are on the way, it helps to know that in advance, design for that. Custom functions, I would say, also give you, the way I write them, gives you a lot of that extensibility, in that I'm building things such that it's easier to change them later if you need to, rather than go down a simple path and saying, okay, well, this will work, but if you start changing things and you start introducing new things, it's gonna break and I'm gonna have to go a different direction. So I like to go that direction to start with. Maybe it seems overly complicated to start with, but the value is that it's going to accommodate changes that we know come. I haven't been on an oncology study yet that hasn't undergone 1, 2, 3, 4 major amendments. And yeah, they're a challenge, but I wouldn't say they're ever fun.
Yeah, I wonder, that's interesting that you mentioned this branching thing, because I'm not a clinical programmer, so I don't know the ins and outs of EDCs, but it seems as though if they have version control, they should be able to almost like map the changes that you're creating from one protocol amendment to another, and then somehow, whatever changes that you're making to the new one, those changes could then automatically be mapped back to kind of create a custom update to the old one. So then in future versions, when you're changing one version of this branch versus another version of this branch, then it could just map this change back to the older version automatically, and then you could QC it and make sure that it's being changed properly.
Well, yeah, and Kevin brought up an interesting point when he said testing. Obviously, the more complex these studies get with, amendment changes, you have to make sure that whoever's testing is understanding it. And if you have a study that's lasting years, well, there's always turnover, there's always new people coming in. So you have to make sure that they understand that level of complexity when they go to do that, or testing just becomes, even more difficult. But one thing I would like to say is, and this is, I don't think anybody will disagree with this, every EDC vendor out there will be like, sure, we can handle version control, not a problem. And yeah, it's not, again, as I think, we've been stating, it's just not that easy to do, because it just overlays it. So and Kevin brought up a good point, we do go the extra mile to make sure that we are not only doing something for today, but we're allowing it to be flexible for tomorrow.
Yeah. Let's just take a break there and see if anybody has any questions before we segue into the next topic. No questions? That's all right. We often have shy participants, um, which is why I'm here. I'm the facilitator, so I will facilitate the new questions. So one thing that we do in SDC, which I don't think a lot of, well, I don't actually know. I don't know if other CROs are early adopters of new EDC and new tech, but we are. And, one of the things that I've been thinking about is what could, the job of an early adopter is to beta test and to provide feedback on what it is that they're doing wrong or doing right or places for improvement. And so I wanted to hear, especially, now that we're talking about branching and these, having to go back into versions to make the same change when you do have protocol amendments, things like that, what could make the next EDC better from your perspective? What could make your life easier?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I know. That's why I ask it, because I can't think of one either.
Well, I mean, being an early adopter allows us to, really have a voice of something, and it could be a very, small thing, but one small thing that is repetitive, thousands of times over, well, that adds up. And gosh, it would just be great to just do that and get it done. Um, you know, but early adopter, you go through the pains of it too, and going through and be like, gosh, it just really doesn't do anything that we need yet and stuff. I just haven't found a way, since we're talking about branching, I can't think of a way that anyone will accomplish version control to 100% without some level of complexity, whether it be custom functions, just custom programming, whatever that might be. So, you know, that to me is probably um, the most important thing. Actually, I would say one thing. I did think of one thing actually. The user accounts. Wouldn't it be great for people to be able to go to a website and register and self-register and be able to then be assigned to studies much easier, rather than having to, create accounts for people, possibly have spelling errors. Let the people do it. We live in a society where, people create user accounts every day, and single sign-on would be great. That would be another thing. It doesn't necessarily help me per se, but it would actually help me since as a CRO, we have, multiple EDC platforms that we utilize for different client sponsors. And, putting my one password in, across multiple systems solves the problem, not having 4 unique passwords. So.
Yeah, and I'll say, as a developer, I mean, I guess I am a little, I'm not objective because I do really like the Rave platform. And so I guess for me as a designer, at least from a designer's perspective, what I want from an EDC system is maximum control over what's going on, which means like custom functions provides access to the library of functions, access to kind of the back end of the programming environment, so that I can do really anything I want. I mean, I like the fact that there are some basic, for lack of a better word, drag and drop type devices in there. There's a migration tool and you can check certain boxes to have it do certain activities. I never use them because I tell people all the time, I want to use a scalpel, and not doing that is using a butcher knife, and I'm doing things very precisely. That's the word I was looking for. And in order to do that, you just kind of need control. So as a true programmer by trade, that's what I want is control over everything. And efficiency of build is really important to me. I don't find, yes, Rave to build a form is a lot more just typing and whatnot. It is not a drag and drop. However, it's a very small percentage of the time am I actually building a form from scratch. I'm almost always borrowing from similar forms, existing forms. And so for me, the efficiency of the build is the most important thing. Taking a study that is very much like another study, and under an hour, I've got a study that is 80 to 90% built. That's very powerful. And so, I mean, Rave more or less offers that. So, that's what's important to me as a designer is efficiency, because we're often asked, I know K-Mac would agree, our workloads are pretty significant. We've got a lot of experience and we've got a lot of practice building lots of studies and doing things at once. And we have a lot on our plate, and it would be very difficult to go in and have to kind of build from scratch each time. It's much better to have a system where I can take this and take that and add this and add that, and boom, and it's out there, with subject to some minor changes. But that's typically how I end up building, and that's very important to me.
Yep. And I build very similarly too. I mean, copying is always a good thing. I think the only difference between the two systems, since we've talked about IMedNet and Rave, is with IMedNet, when you copy over a form, you're copying over all the edit checks that come with that. If you use the copy function in that way. Where in Rave, you can say, well, I only want these fields with these edit checks and stuff. So there is a little bit greater granularity available there. But it would take nothing, after a form is copied into IMedNet with a bunch of edit checks to simply delete, be like, no, I don't want that. No, I don't want that. So either there's pluses and minuses, but copying is a big thing. The challenge is, I think, only when we get to a point where someone comes with a CRF, generally something that is more of a questionnaire that's used out in the industry that we may not have created yet. So obviously creating it from scratch. So that's one of the the nice things. Copying saves us a lot, and not saves us in any other way but time, and from an efficiency perspective, as Kevin brought up.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, all of those, I think the most important thing is also efficiencies, and being able to copy and paste from an older study is vital to us being able to make time for more studies and for other things like training and development and um, adopting earlier tools. And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Anything to create efficiencies is always a good thing. The even copying a report from study to study. Hey, I did this great report over here. Can I do it over here? Well, yeah, I'll have to, recreate it. If we could copy it from study to study, we'd be even happier. So, and then you can get to those finer details and you can sit there and say, hey, what is it we're really looking at or looking for now? So,
yeah, or how can we really adjust the design to optimize this study?
right.
Thinking about things like that as opposed to, okay, let's program from scratch. It's going to take forever. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes it happens and you just deal with it. And that's where the tools really come into play to ensure that you can create things quickly and easily to create those efficiencies. So it doesn't feel so mundane and so, like, oh gosh, I have all 500 edit checks to create because we haven't done these before. Because each study is always going to be slightly different no matter what. There isn't, everybody says, oh no, this will just be, really, it's a close replica. Well,
It's like, this is
what's
a
the
sister
difference?
study. Everything is the
Mm.
same. Of
Yeah,
course, you can just copy and paste the entire thing.
yeah, I've heard that way too many times.
So have I. Well, before we move on, I wanted to take a pause, ask if anyone has any questions. No questions, silence. That's quite all right. Okay, so one of the things that I am really excited to talk about is this new movement into AI. Or I guess it's not really a movement, it's already started, especially here at SDC. We do have an AI team creating tools within our company in order to make our processes internally more efficient and effective. But, I wanted to hear a little about what those initiatives are um, in the clinical programming group as far as AI, and kind of hear like what challenges do you foresee our AI group um, having to overcome in order to create these tools?
Well, I think the second question is probably easier to answer than the first. I mean, I
Okay,
can't
we
speak
can
for
do it in
KMAC.
any order.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not personally involved in that initiative. I'm somewhat aware of what they're doing and the goals behind it. I know it is definitely a big buzzword. When I was at the Metadata conference a year or two ago, I mean, that was a big topic of discussion. They've got some software around it. And for those not familiar, it's basically using algorithms and kind of mining data and using algorithms to find patterns and things that either aid in reporting. So you're finding outliers not because you wrote a check to say if this date is outside, but because that date doesn't seem to belong based on the pattern of data that exists. That seems like an outlier, that kind of thing. But also, I think we're using it more with conjunction with the data warehouse to kind of compile all of the data that we gather from all the studies, all of the designs that we do, to look for patterns, look for ways of being more efficient, whether it's in building or generating reports. I think a lot of it is generating reports and being able to consolidate data, to normalize the data, to put it in a standard type structure so that we can design reports that are kind of general and can be applied to any study. Maybe KMAC might have a different understanding of that, but in terms of the challenges, I just think the
Sorry, I
complexity
have
of
a quick
study. Yeah,
question.
go ahead. Yeah.
So these reports, what's in these reports? These aren't like reports that are for clients, are they? They're internal reports, right?
I think
Internal and
both.
external.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, some reports that we now use SAS to create on a study by study basis, could potentially be leveraged in a database, whether it's a SQL or other database. where you're applying, if you can normalize the data and you say, well, an AE left from here and an AE from this study, you kind of combine and you standardize the terms, the main fields into a single database structure, and then you can run queries on it, filtering out by study if that's what you're doing. But yeah, it just allows for some complex, maybe standard reports to be applied across studies. And I don't know if that's the true reason behind the initiative, but that is certainly one of the potential benefits.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been involved a little bit more from the periphery, just for creating the connectivity to the different databases and stuff, and kind of helping, with getting the data. Kevin, I think provided a great explanation to, that the aspect of data mining perspective, to look for things in a much more standardized fashion and to adjust that over even time, and having some intelligence with it. Because when we write a report in SAS, as an example, the code is static. It doesn't evolve, it doesn't change unless someone says, hey, I noticed this. It takes someone to say, hey, I noticed this. So having a warehouse, having artificial intelligence on that, overlaying that to look for those things constantly, and looking for different patterns, I think is also huge. I know one of the other objectives is to eventually get to a point where one could, look at a protocol and look for certain things, and then be able to create what the database structure could and should look like as a result. So if you wanted to take it to that level too, is reviewing protocols, so that it's like, okay, well, here's what we see you need. It's not, again, it's not left up to human interpretation and skill sets and things like that. Here it is. It's going to be spit out the same exact way every single time. And I think that's where clinical trials are evolving to, is getting to the point where they can do those kind of things. And then with a warehouse, well, you can do an awful lot more with it, because now you can do more of the risk-based monitoring functions that people talk about. That was the buzzword, by the way, in the industry years ago, and that kind of has leveled out. It's there. People are like, yeah, this is what we know it can do, but did it really take off? Even CDISC back in the day, everybody talked about CDISC and how important it was. And, oh my gosh. And it took years before it really kind of, settled in. And the FDA even accepted, CDISC outputs. I think it'll be years before people really, understand the true benefits of what AI is going to do and what it is that they want out of it. And it's like any report, it's a black hole, because there's going to be, from the programming world, we call that scope creep, because people will be like, well, that's great, but now can you look at this? And then, well, now that you did that, well, what about this? So it'll be that never ending, black hole that just never goes away.
Right. And I mean, as you build your algorithm and as it learns from, prior data or new data, it's almost as if, we would actually need to create a different algorithm in and of itself for each indication. And so really in reality, for a CRO to have AI, we'd have to ourselves be specialized in a specific indication. I mean, luckily we are, but I'm thinking about, other CROs that touch a lot of different indications. And, even in oncology itself, every oncology study is so unique that it'd be hard to teach the computer the nuances of each oncology.
Yes and
And that,
no.
oh,
It's
go ahead.
it it can learn. The whole idea of AI is to learn from itself. And I mean, if you really wanted to get a little science fiction for a minute, what if the AI could start building algorithms itself based on what it's previously seen and then refining those algorithms over time? That's ultimately what it could do. It could think for itself and say, gosh, I'm seeing this new thing that we're doing. And hey, well, or this old thing, well, yeah, but now we're seeing this trend. What if it starts thinking for itself? But that's because I'm a science fiction buff. So,
Yeah, to me
but it's
that
Yeah.
true.
speaks. Yeah, I mean that's what speaks to the challenge of this is number one. I mean, it requires a lot of data over a lot of time to learn and to refine its algorithms and to find meaningful solutions to things or meaningful patterns. But also, like any system, garbage in, garbage out. If what's coming into the system is highly varied, not consistent, if you've got different kind of field names for different situations, if you've got 18 different ways of doing a vital signs form, and that's not the way we do it on purpose sometimes, but every sponsor has, they want this, but they don't want that, or they want it over here instead of there. And so when you have all of these different ways of doing things, I mean, it can it'll create a challenge to integrate all of that. There is still a human component. We're not just buying a machine and say, here, go. There's a lot of people working on, trying to compile data and trying to find things to find the initiatives and where they're going to gain an advantage. And it's tough when you've got, we've got many ADC platforms, we've got lots of different study types and design practices. So yeah, I mean, integrating all of that in a meaningful way and in a meaningful time frame is definitely a challenge. So, but I think it's a
Uh,
worthwhile pursuit.
yeah, and actually, just to add something based on some experience I had, several years ago, we talk about a data warehouse, but what if the sponsor, like a big pharma, has their own data warehouse? And we have to help integrate with that. So there's a lot of that back and forth. Yeah, we're doing things for ourselves to help our clients, but what about the clients who already have something too, and they do things a certain way? And I can think of a couple big pharmas that did that a long time ago, and they said, nope, this is the way we have to get it.
Right. And I think that lends very well into, this idea that as we do get new adoption of AI, even inside the EDC world, how is that going to affect us and our builds? What challenges will we have to overcome if they are pushing AI onto us?
So so let's take vital signs because Kevin mentioned that, and that's unfortunately the best example I can give. Everybody collects it somewhat differently, vertically, horizontally, combination of both. Our hope is to standardize it and say, we want to collect it like this. We have to now convince this client slash sponsor to collect it like that too. Now, will they go that route? Yeah, we can do that. But again, there's those people in the industry that say, no, we've always done it like this. We have to collect it like this. So it will be an education back, because we'll develop best practices as a result, but then we have to be able to then, and I use this term loosely, sell it back to the client to say, this is our best practice and this is the way we feel you're going to get maximize the benefit. And they have to be saying, yep, we agree.
Hmm, okay. Um, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of challenging uh, opinions in the future.
There, exactly. You just said it best. Opinions. Everybody has one.
Hmm. Yeah, but I think that's one of the things that I guess a lot of us are concerned about is this movement into AI. And not only that, but what do we see as we grow within SDC? How are we going to have to, think about training and development of you guys as clinical programmers, of our data managers, of, everybody across the board, at, even at the data analyst position. Like data cleaning will evolve, and how will they need to evolve with it?
It's like the industry has done that for decades. If you go back 20 years, people got a simple database or it was a piece of paper, and who wrote the edit check? Biostats. They were the ones in charge of all the edit checks. They, the data cleaning, things like that. And today, we're doing all of those edit checks. We're doing all that work. So then stats gets, a very clean set of data to then work with. So they don't have to, they've removed their overhead. There could be 5-10 years down the road where, some of our overhead is removed as a result of now AI, taking over. AI wrote the edit checks. And we just have to sit there and say, yep, those look right for this study. Who knows?
Or maybe neural implants.
God, I hope not.
I'll volunteer.
You don't want to know
Then
what's
you
in my
can
head some
hear
days.
you can hear all my thoughts. Yeah, let's just take a break here, and I know we only have 5 minutes left about and see if anybody has any final questions. Any shy
Well,
attendees?
I wanted to volunteer just in case. I mean, if I
Yes.
look at the title, in case there are folks on here that were, hoping for more, discussion on, complex oncology study design, I can give an example or a couple of examples of kind of the need for custom functions specific to oncology. One of the hallmarks of an oncology study are the concept of cycles, right? So you have many cycles of treatment that occur over a period of time. Some are just 1 or 2 cycles. In that instance, it makes sense to design a database that you just, as I say, hard code a cycle. So you've got cycle 1 folders and you got cycle 2 folders and everything's easy. A lot of oncology studies are 6 cycles, 12 cycles, 20 cycles, infinite cycles. As long as the subject is surviving and responding to treatment, they're going to keep going. And so the ravability of repeating folders, repeating cycles, and repeating that functionality over time is one of the key ways that it can manage these studies in an effective way that makes sense and follows the protocol. I have seen study designs in Rave that literally have 30 cycles worth of folders. So we're talking the cycle 1, and then day 1, cycle 1, day 2, cycle 1, and then do that. And then they literally have 200 folders and forms that are specific to cycles and days. And that is, it's a mess. It's a headache to work with, and the number of checks and forms and things that are kept track of and the duplication of effort across all of these is a nightmare. So using custom functions to manage that cyclical process of development is huge. I have a sponsor that, if you can follow this, they can go through a cycle, and at some point at the end of that cycle, they can go one of 2 ways. They can go to the next cycle, or they can end the study, or actually a third way is to go to a follow-up. And so some subjects go to follow-up, and during that follow-up, they may determine that they are eligible for another cycle or not eligible for another cycle. So those subjects that are eligible go back and do a cycle 2. And then during that cycle, then they exit that, and then they go to another follow-up. But this is a separate follow-up, different from the other follow-up. And from that follow-up, they can go back to another cycle or not, or go somewhere else or go to a different follow-up. So you can't do that without some amount of customization functions in the background controlling all of this behavior. And to simply throw everything out there and make everything available from the start just does sites a disservice. It creates a lot of confusion and headache for the DMs as well. So just in case, I just wanted to give some examples of why and how you can leverage custom functions to apply to complex oncology study designs, because it's right there in the title.
Well, yeah, and I'll actually speak to one of an experience I had years ago where it was an oncology study, but to not only deal with cycles, but then there was also treatments. You could have up to 4 treatments for those different cycles. So it's not just, a single treatment, with, multiple cycles. It was multiple treatments with multiple cycles. So that, and I actually did it in Imed, and it was definitely a challenge. And there was a lot of back and forth. And actually, there was, I took a day and sat with the client directly, the client consultant, and the data manager, and we went through the whole thing and said, okay, well, what about this? Okay, yeah, this looks good. Now what about that? And so there was a lot of back and forth. So oncology studies, yeah, it can be very difficult. Device studies can be very difficult too. Oncology is obviously, by the nature of the title, is complex from the word go. Um, Single treatment, multiple cycles, multiple treatments, multiple cycles. And as Kevin said, that ugly word, infinite. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
let's just go until we can't go anymore. And then from a programming perspective, if you think about all the reports that you have to do as a result of that, you have to be your code has to be very open-ended to allow for that growth. And so you have to take the extra time to focus on that. So nothing is easy, and oncology, because of its nature, is already highly difficult. So
Great, thank you guys. And thank you again for everybody who attended. Thank you for this great discussion. And if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to reach out. Our emails are inside the original invite for the Meet the Experts event. Yeah, I think that wraps us up here. And thank you both, Kevins, for joining us and volunteering for this. I hope I didn't put y'all on the spot too much.
nah, it's all good. And thank you very much for putting this together.
Yep.
It was quite enjoyable to talk about that level of complexity.
Yeah, great. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Thanks all.
you. Bye bye.